I didn't know my life would fracture into a before and an after the night my husband told me he wanted a divorce, 1 month after I told him I was pregnant. I was 32 years old, standing barefoot in the kitchen of the house we had just bought together, one hand resting instinctively on my stomach, still trying to get used to the idea that there was a heartbeat inside me. And Sean, the man I believed I had chosen freely, the man I thought I had built a life with on my own terms, looked at me like I was a stranger. "I'm not ready for this," he said. Not ready for the baby. Not ready for marriage. Not ready for responsibility. He said the pregnancy made him realize we wanted different futures. The words sounded rehearsed, too clean, too organized, like a script. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me. He didn't even look guilty. He just spoke in calm, detached sentences, as if he had practiced them in the mirror. "I don't love you the way I should," he added. That was the moment my chest tightened. Not because I believed him, but because something in his tone felt wrong. Sean had been excited when I told him about the baby. He had taken me to dinner. He had talked about nursery paint colors and names, and now he was walking away. He packed a suitcase the next morning, said we'd let the lawyers handle things. He wouldn't answer questions. He wouldn't argue. He wouldn't explain. He just left. I remember standing in the doorway watching his car disappear down our street, feeling something colder than heartbreak settle inside me. Because heartbreak is chaotic. This felt orchestrated. I didn't know then that my mother had been paying my husband in secret for over a year. I didn't know she had written the script he was reading from. I didn't know my marriage had been an investment portfolio, funded, monitored, and manipulated without my knowledge. And I definitely didn't know that the man I loved had signed a contract promising to report on my life. But I would find out. And when I did, everything I thought I had escaped came rushing back. Because I had cut my mother out of my life years ago. Or at least, I thought I had. I'm going to tell you the truth the way it actually happened, not the version my family likes to repeat at holidays, not the version my mother would polish into something that makes her look concerned and me look unstable. Because my whole life, my mother never needed to scream to control me. She only needed to frame me. My name is Ava Sinclair. I'm 32, and I work in marketing, the kind of job where you learn early that perception is power. That detail matters, because it's the one irony that still makes me laugh in a dark way. I literally build narratives for a living, and I still didn't see the narrative my mother built around me. My mother, Claudia Sinclair, is 58 now. She is elegant in a way that reads as classy to strangers. She speaks softly. She touches your arm when she lies. She cries in controlled, pretty tears. People think she's refined. She isn't. She is precise. My grandfather started a manufacturing business in the 1960s. It grew big enough that money wasn't something our family worried about. It was something we used like a shield. When I was 8, my father, Daniel Sinclair, vanished. Not left, not divorced, vanished. The police investigated. There were searches, meetings in rooms where adults spoke in careful tones while pretending I wasn't listening. His office was cleaned out. His name stayed on papers, but his presence disappeared from our home like a light switched off. No one ever found him. After that, Claudia took over everything. She hired people to run the business. She kept the house. She kept the money. And she kept me. But she didn't raise me the way mothers in movies raise their daughters, with warmth and messy affection. I grew up like a display piece in a museum. We had staff, people who cooked, cleaned, drove. Claudia didn't need to do those things. What she did instead was monitor. Every door in my life had a lock, and she held the keys. I wasn't allowed to have friends over. "They'll use you," she'd say, voice gentle, like she was warning me about a storm. She picked my clothes until I was 16. It wasn't dramatic. She'd just lay outfits on my bed and wait. If I reached for something else, she'd pause, tilt her head and say, "Are you sure you want to look like that?" If I complained, she'd smile. "Sweetheart, I'm helping." She read my texts and emails. She didn't act like she was invading my privacy. She acted like it was normal. "Your father leaving made me realize the world is dangerous," she'd say. "I'm the only one who will protect you." And then came the sentence she used like a knife with a velvet handle. "Your father left because you were too much work." She didn't spit it. She didn't shout it. She would say it while pouring tea, as if it was a fact, as if my existence was a weight that had broken her marriage. So I grew up believing love was conditional. Love required you to be manageable. Love required you to be easy. At 18, I left for college across the country and thought distance would give me oxygen. It didn't. She called every day, not once in a while. Every day. If I didn't answer, she would leave messages that sounded caring, but felt like threats. I'm worried. I can't sleep. If you keep shutting me out, I don't know why I'm paying for your tuition. Once a month, she would fly out without asking. She'd show up at my dorm like she owned it. Demand to meet professors. Demand to see grades. She didn't care that I was an adult. She cared that I was still within reach. And then, during my junior year, I made the mistake of thinking I could have something normal. I started dating a guy named Ethan Parker, engineering student, kind eyes, normal family. We went to a little restaurant near campus, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe in someone's presence. Then Claudia walked in, not by accident. She walked straight to our table, sat down without invitation, and started asking Ethan questions that felt like an interrogation dressed up as polite conversation. What do your parents do? How much do they earn? What's your plan after graduation? How do you intend to support a woman like my daughter? I remember Ethan's face going tight, not angry, just stunned, like a person realizing they'd stepped into a trap. He excused himself to the restroom and never came back. When I confronted Claudia, shaking, she rested a manicured hand on my shoulder and said, "See, he proved my point. A real man wouldn't run." As if she hadn't set the building on fire and then blamed him for leaving. After graduation, I moved to Chicago. I got my own apartment. I got my own job. I told myself, this is my life now. She doesn't get to touch it. Claudia didn't accept that. She started showing up at my apartment. She called my workplace. She demanded to speak to supervisors. She slid into my life like smoke under a door. Then, when I was 26, I dated a teacher named Michael Reed. For 8 months, it was steady, real. We cooked dinner together. He met my friends. He held my hand in public. He made me believe I wasn't broken. And Claudia couldn't stand that. She called him and told him I was mentally unstable, that I'd been in and out of psychiatric facilities since childhood, that my family was considering having me committed again. She said it like she was worried for him. Michael confronted me, face pale, hands trembling as he asked, "Is any of that true?" When I told him no, he didn't know what to believe. My mother sounded convincing, concerned, maternal. He broke up with me that same day. I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment afterward, phone in my hand, staring at nothing. And I realized something. Claudia didn't just want to control me. She wanted to control how everyone saw me. She wanted me to be the difficult daughter, the unstable daughter, the one who needed managing. So I did the only thing I could do. I went to a lawyer. I got a restraining order. I changed my number. I moved. I refused her money. And for 2 years, I heard nothing. 2 years of silence. 2 years where I started to believe I had finally escaped. Then, 3 years ago, I met Sean Keller, a finance guy, soft-spoken, normal childhood in Ohio, divorced parents but decent relationships with both, no flashy car, no obsession with status, the kind of man who paid for dinner without making it a performance. We met at a coffee shop near my office. He offered me the last empty seat at a crowded table, smiled like it was nothing, and somehow, the conversation felt easy. When I told him, carefully, that my relationship with my mother was cut off, he didn't pry. He just said, "I get it. You don't owe anyone access to you." That sentence hooked into something hungry inside me, because I had spent my whole life being told I owed my mother everything. With Sean, I felt like I could finally just be a person. We dated. We moved in together. We got married last year in a small ceremony. 10 close friends. No family. His parents couldn't travel for health reasons. My mother wasn't invited, obviously. We went to Italy for our honeymoon. And when we came back, we started saving for a house like a normal couple. For 2 years, we saved. We planned. We dreamed. 6 months ago, we bought the house. And that was when everything started to shift. So slowly at first, I didn't realize I was watching my life get pulled back into Claudia's orbit. Because I didn't know my mother had found him. I didn't know she had been watching. I didn't know she had reached into my marriage and put a price tag on it. Not yet. Looking back now, the signs were there. Not loud, not dramatic, just small shifts. Like furniture moved half an inch each day until the whole room feels wrong and you can't explain why. 6 months after we bought the house, Sean started changing. At first, it looked like success. He suggested we try a new steakhouse downtown, one of those places with dim lighting and wine lists that read like novels. "Let's celebrate," he said, smiling. "We work hard. We deserve it." I remember laughing. "Since when are you the we deserve luxury guy?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm evolving." The bill that night was more than we usually spent in a week on groceries. I asked gently, "Are we okay financially?" He pulled out his phone and showed me his pay stubs, his investment account. clean numbers, organized. I got another raise, he said, and my portfolio's doing well. It looked legitimate, and I wanted to trust him, so I did. Then he bought a new car. Not absurdly expensive, but newer, shiny. A quiet upgrade from his 10-year-old Honda. Didn't we talk about waiting? I asked, standing in the driveway, staring at it. It was time, he replied. The old one wasn't reliable. He kissed my forehead. Relax, Ava, I've got it handled. That phrase, I've got it handled. I didn't realize then how much I had grown up hearing a version of that sentence. Don't worry, I know better. Trust me. The dinners became more frequent. The vacations more ambitious. He started talking about maybe upgrading to a bigger house in a few years. It didn't make sense. Even with raises, our income didn't support this level of acceleration. One night, lying in bed, I said quietly, "Are you sure we're not stretching ourselves too thin?" He rolled toward me, brushed my hair back. "Why are you always worried something's going to collapse?" Because that's what happens when foundations are fake, I thought, but I didn't say it. "I'm not worried," I replied. "I just want us to be smart." He kissed me. "We are." Then 2 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. I was standing in the bathroom holding the test, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it was in my throat. I stared at the 2 lines until they blurred. When I told Sean, he looked stunned for half a second. Then he smiled. Not forced, not fake. He picked me up and spun me once in the living room. "We're going to be parents," he whispered. That night, he took me to dinner, ordered sparkling water for me, talked about nursery colors. "What about Daniel?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Daniel? For a boy, after your dad." The mention of my father hit something deep in me. Sean knew how much that name meant. "I like that," I said softly. For a week, he seemed excited. Then something shifted. He started staring at his phone more often. Not in a casual way, in a tense, absorbed way. The screen lighting his face in the dark. If I asked who he was texting, he'd say, "Work." He began staying late at the office. When he came home, he went straight into the small room we'd turned into his office and closed the door. The first time he shut it, I stood outside it longer than I should have. Not because I thought he was cheating, because it felt like being shut out of something that had my name on it. "Are you okay?" I asked one night, leaning against the doorframe as he typed. He didn't look up. "Yeah, just handling some stuff." Handling. There it was again. When I brought up baby names again, he changed the subject. When I talked about scheduling our first prenatal appointment together, he said he had meetings. And then came the irritation. Small, sharp responses. "Can we not talk about this right now? You're overthinking. Why does everything have to be a big emotional conversation?" One evening, I reached for his hand on the couch. He pulled away absent-mindedly to answer a text. I sat there staring at the space between us. I had lived this distance before, not in marriage, but in childhood. The feeling of someone slowly repositioning you without explaining why. Then, one afternoon, I walked past his office and heard him say something that froze me. "I understand," he said quietly into the phone. "Yes, I'll handle it." The tone was careful, controlled. I stepped away before he saw me listening. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the house settling around us. I pressed my hand to my stomach. "I've done this before," I whispered into the dark. "I've survived control before. But this was different. This wasn't my mother. This was my husband. And I didn't know yet that those two realities were about to collide. Because the seed of the real conflict wasn't Sean's distance. It was the money. The unexplained acceleration. The sense that something external was propping us up. I just didn't know who. Not yet. The night Sean asked for a divorce, it wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Too quiet. I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, trying to focus on something ordinary. The house smelled like garlic and olive oil. My hand moved automatically over the cutting board while my mind replayed the last few weeks. The distance, the closed doors, the phone screen lighting his face in the dark. Sean stood at the edge of the kitchen island. "Ava," he said. There was something in his voice that made my body go still before my mind caught up. I put the knife down. "What is it?" He didn't sit. He didn't come closer. He kept a physical distance that felt intentional. "I've been thinking," he began. That sentence never leads anywhere good. "About us," he added. My heartbeat started climbing. I felt it in my throat. "I don't think this is working." I stared at him. "What isn't working?" "Our marriage." It felt like the room tilted. "You're joking." "I'm not." His tone was steady, controlled, measured. "I'm not ready for this," he continued, gesturing vaguely toward my stomach. "The baby." "You were ready 2 weeks ago," I whispered. He inhaled slowly. The pregnancy made me realize something. I don't want this life. "What life?" My voice was shaking now. "The one we built?" "I think we rushed into marriage. We dated for 3 years." "I know." "Then what is this actually about?" He looked away. That was when I felt it. the script. His sentences sounded structured, clean, like bullet points. I don't love you the way I should. My chest constricted. Is there someone else? I asked. No. Is this about money? No. Is this about my mother? His eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. No. The lie didn't come from his mouth. It came from his hesitation. I walked around the island slowly, stopping in front of him. Look at me. He did. Say it again. Say this has nothing to do with my mother. He swallowed. It has nothing to do with her. But it wasn't conviction. It was compliance. Then why now? I demanded. Why after the house? Why after the baby? He exhaled sharply. I'm not ready to be a father. You said you were. I changed my mind. You don't just change your mind about a child. His jaw tightened. Lower your voice. I laughed once, a broken sound. I'm pregnant and my husband just told me he's leaving and you're worried about the volume? He didn't engage emotionally. He didn't argue back. He was detached. And that detachment scared me more than anger would have. The next morning, he packed a suitcase. Not the big one, not a dramatic exit, just a controlled departure. I'll have my lawyer contact yours, he said at the door. You already have a lawyer? I asked. He didn't answer that directly. I want this to be civil. Civil, like we were negotiating office space, not dismantling a marriage. Sean, I said quietly, stepping closer, if you're scared, we can work through that. If you're overwhelmed, we can slow down. But don't pretend you just stopped loving me overnight. He looked at me then, and for a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, but not the kind that comes from falling out of love. The kind that comes from knowing you're following instructions. I'm sorry, he said. And then he left. I stood in the doorway watching his car drive away. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like execution. Something pre-decided, pre-arranged. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table. The house was too quiet. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Take care of yourself. No name, no context. But something about it made my skin crawl. Later that day, I called a lawyer and filed for divorce. Sean hired his own attorney, a downtown firm I knew was expensive. I remember staring at the email signature of his lawyer and thinking, how can he afford this? Because even with raises, our finances didn't support that kind of representation. That was the first crack that let doubt in. The second crack came 2 days later. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, knocked on my door with a container of soup. She was 67, observant, and the kind of woman who noticed everything on the street. I saw your husband moving out, she said gently. I nodded. She hesitated. There's something I thought you should know. My hands went cold instantly. What? I've seen a woman come by your house several times over the past year, when you were at work. My stomach dropped. What did she look like? Mrs. Chen described her. Perfect posture, blonde hair styled precisely, pearl earrings, a soft voice. My mother, she told me she was helping you two financially, Mrs. Chen continued. Said young couples struggle sometimes. The room started spinning. She said she was happy you found such a good man. I gripped the edge of the counter. How many times did she come? Oh, at least once a month. Once a month. Regular. Intentional. My heart began pounding so hard I thought I might faint. I didn't thank Mrs. Chen. I didn't finish the conversation. I got in my car and drove straight to Sean's new apartment. He opened the door, looking startled. When he saw my face, the color drained from his. You talked to her, I said. It wasn't a question. He stepped back slowly. Come in. That was the moment everything unraveled. Because what he told me next wasn't an apology. It was a confession. My mother had contacted him 6 months after our wedding. She had hired a private investigator to look into him. She knew his salary, his debts, his parents' financial situation, everything. She invited him to lunch. At that lunch, she offered him money. $500 a month at first, then $1,000, then $3,000, in exchange for helping us live comfortably, and in exchange for something else. Updates, weekly updates, about me, our marriage, our conversations, my moods, my plans. When he finished speaking, the room felt airless. How much? I asked. He hesitated. $47,000. My legs nearly gave out. She said she just wanted to help, he said weakly. And you believe that? She said she cared about you. I let out a hollow laugh. No, I said slowly. She cared about controlling me. Then he told me the part that made my blood run cold. When he told her I was pregnant, she panicked. She told him children ruin marriages. She said I had ruined hers. And she gave him an ultimatum. Convinced me to terminate the pregnancy, or she would cut off the money. When he refused to push me toward an abortion, she stopped paying him immediately. And that was when he realized he couldn't afford our lifestyle without her. That was when he decided divorce was easier than truth. I stared at him across that apartment. You didn't leave because you stopped loving me, I said quietly. You left because the payment stopped. He didn't deny it. And in that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was orchestration. My marriage had been funded, monitored, and dismantled by my mother. And my husband had agreed to it. When I walked out of Sean's apartment that night, I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked calmly down the hallway, pressed the elevator button, and stared at my reflection in the metal doors. My face looked almost peaceful, but inside something had collapsed. Not just my marriage. My sense of reality. $47,000. Weekly reports. A financial leash attached to my husband. And my mother holding the other end. I sat in my car in his parking lot for almost 2 hours. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I wasn't seeing the dashboard. I was seeing patterns. Claudia doesn't act impulsively. She plans. Which meant this hadn't started 6 months after our wedding. It had started the moment she realized I was happy. The moment she realized I had built something outside her reach. When I finally drove home, the house felt contaminated. The couch we'd chosen together, the dining table we argued about for 3 hours before buying, the framed photos from Italy, all of it funded by her. I went into the bedroom and opened the closet. His side was half empty. I sat on the floor and let myself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that came from somewhere deeper than anger. Then I pressed my hand to my stomach. I choose you, I whispered. That decision was immediate. There was never a moment where I considered ending the pregnancy. That part of me was clear, but everything else was chaos. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told her everything Sean had confessed. There was silence on the other end. That's significant, she finally said. We hired a forensic accountant. If my mother had been funneling money into Sean's account, there would be records. And there were. Over a year of deposits. $47,000 total. But that wasn't the worst part. Sean had been transferring money from his personal account, the one my mother was funding, into our joint account. Which meant every mortgage payment, every restaurant, every vacation had been paid for by her. My entire independent life was still financed by Claudia Sinclair. The humiliation of that realization hit harder than the divorce. I had worked so hard to refuse her money, and she had slipped it back into my life anyway. Then the accountant found something else. A credit card, opened 6 months earlier, in both our names, $15,000 in charges, statements sent to Sean's office address. I stared at the report on my kitchen table. How could I not have known? I asked aloud. But that was the wrong question. The right question was, how deeply had I wanted to believe I was free? My lawyer said we could press criminal charges for fraud. I considered it, but I was tired. Tired of courtrooms, tired of public battles, tired of giving Claudia the spectacle she thrived on. Instead, we negotiated. Sean would take responsibility for the debt. I would keep the house. He would pay child support once the baby was born. He signed without arguing. His expensive lawyer, also paid for by my mother, I later learned, didn't push back, because Sean knew he was guilty. But guilt doesn't undo damage. A week later, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside were printed emails. Hundreds of them. Sean's weekly reports. My stomach twisted as I read. She's been stressed about work lately. She mentioned wanting kids someday. She seemed distant tonight. We argued about money. Intimate details. Conversations from our bedroom. Sent to my mother like progress reports. There was also a contract. Signed. Formal. If I discovered the arrangement, he was required to end the marriage immediately. He was required to tell me he had fallen out of love. Those weren't his words. They were hers. I felt physically ill. My marriage hadn't failed organically. It had been terminated according to terms. At the bottom of the package was a letter from Claudia. Her handwriting was elegant. Ava, it began. I'm sorry things unfolded this way, but I was only trying to protect you. Protect me. She wrote that Sean was weak and easily bought. She wrote that I deserved better. She wrote that she was proud of how I handled the divorce with dignity. And then she offered money, a trust fund for the baby, financial support, a fresh start. She wanted another chance. Not with me, with my child. I didn't finish the letter. I tore it in half. Then again, and I threw it in the trash. That night, I called my friend Rachel, one of the few people who had stood by me when I got the restraining order years ago. I told her everything. There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, Ava, there's something I should tell you. 6 months earlier, Claudia had contacted her, invited her to lunch, asked questions about my mental health, my relationships, my plans, offered to pay her for updates. Rachel had refused, but she hadn't told me because she didn't want to upset me during my pregnancy. I felt the walls closing in. How many people has she approached? I whispered. I started reaching out to others. One by one, small truths surfaced. My boss had once mentioned a family friend taking her to lunch to discuss my career trajectory. Charities I supported had received anonymous donations in my name. Events I attended had, coincidentally, included someone who later asked oddly specific questions about my life. She hadn't just bribed my husband. She had infiltrated my ecosystem. This wasn't control. This was surveillance. And the most painful realization wasn't that she was watching. It was that she believed she had the right to. I stood in the nursery to be, a room still empty except for paint samples on the wall. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt angry. Not explosive anger. Not the kind that burns hot and disappears. But cold, focused anger. The kind that clarifies. I had tried distance. I had tried silence. I had tried legal boundaries. None of it stopped her. So the question wasn't whether I should confront her. The question was, how do you escape someone with unlimited money and no moral line? Because I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting my son. And Claudia Sinclair had already proven she was willing to dismantle my marriage to maintain control. What would she do next? If the story had ended with the divorce, maybe I could have rebuilt quietly. But my mother doesn't lose control gracefully. She escalates. 3 days after I tore up her letter, my phone started buzzing with unknown numbers. Voicemails from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Ava, your mother is worried sick. She says you're not yourself. She just wants to help with the baby. Help! That word again. Then came the emails. My aunt wrote that Claudia had been crying nonstop since the divorce. A cousin I barely knew messaged me on social media asking if I was getting treatment. Treatment. I felt my stomach drop. She was rewriting the narrative. Again. According to the new version of events, I had suffered a mental breakdown during my marriage. I had isolated Sean. I had refused support from my loving mother. I had spiraled after he left. The story painted me as fragile, unstable, emotionally unreliable. It was subtle enough to sound concerned, but pointed enough to plant doubt. I knew that strategy. If you can't control the person, control how people see them. I blocked numbers. I stopped responding. But that didn't stop her. My lawyer called one afternoon. Someone's been inquiring about custody law in your state, she said carefully. Inquiring how? Asking hypotheticals about grandparent visitation rights. My blood ran cold. She can't, I said. Not automatically, my lawyer replied, but if she can prove instability or neglect. Neglect. I stared at the wall. She's preparing, I whispered. That same week, Mrs. Chen came by again. There was a car parked outside your house yesterday, she said quietly. 2 men inside. They were taking photos. I walked to the window instinctively, heart pounding. The street looked normal, but I knew better. I hired a private investigator of my own. The irony wasn't lost on me. Within a week, he confirmed what I already suspected. Claudia had hired multiple surveillance firms over the past 3 years. 3 years. She had been tracking me long before my marriage unraveled. Tracking my apartments, my jobs, my friendships, my routines. She's thorough, the investigator said, almost impressed. She's obsessive, I corrected. Then something worse surfaced. Through legal discovery during the divorce proceedings, we learned that Claudia had paid for Sean's attorney. Not directly, through a shell company. She had ensured he had proper representation. She had structured the entire dismantling of my marriage to look legitimate. Every layer I uncovered revealed another. Then, 2 months before my due date, a woman knocked on my door. Mid-50s, friendly smile, casserole dish in hand. Hi, she said brightly. I'm Patricia. I just moved in next door. I forced a polite smile. She asked about my pregnancy, offered help, came by again the next day. Then the day after that. She asked a lot of questions. Where I worked, whether the baby's father was involved, if I had family nearby. Too many questions. One morning I woke up and found her in my backyard. I saw your lights on late, she said. Just wanted to check on you. My spine went rigid. You can't enter my property without permission. Oh, I was just worried, she replied smoothly. That word again. Worried. That afternoon, I called my investigator. He ran her license plate. The car was registered to a surveillance services company. Her real name wasn't Patricia. She worked for the same firm my mother had used before. And the house next door? Owned by a shell corporation. Owned by Claudia. She had purchased it 6 months earlier, before I even knew I was pregnant. She had anticipated my need to run. She had planted herself beside me. I packed that night. I didn't overthink it. I didn't debate it. I grabbed what I could fit in the car and drove. No credit cards, no online bookings, cash only. I stayed in a hotel under a variation of my name. My lawyer confirmed something chilling. She's been checking court records, monitoring hospital registrations, filing inquiries. Inquiries. Like I was an asset to recover. My due date was approaching, and Claudia was closing in. Then came the call. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. Ava, her voice said. Calm, controlled, familiar. I know you're pregnant with my grandson. My breath caught. You don't get to call him that. He's my blood, she replied evenly, and I won't let you disappear with him. You don't own us. I own every resource necessary to find you. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. I've been patient, she continued, but you're being irrational. We need to discuss custody. Custody. He's not even born. And yet you're already making reckless decisions. She paused. I've been recording Sean's confessions. I can have him arrested for fraud tomorrow, unless you're willing to meet. It wasn't a threat. It was leverage. I hung up. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the phone. That was the moment something shifted from fear to clarity. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about concern. This was about possession. And I understood something finally. Claudia doesn't see people. She sees assets. And my son was next on her list. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If she could follow me across states, if she could buy surveillance, lawyers, neighbors, then distance wasn't enough. I needed disappearance, not drama, not confrontation, erasure. Because the only way to win against someone who believes they own you is to become unreachable. Daniel was born on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks early. Labor started before dawn. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, breath catching, the world narrowing into sharp waves of pain. My friend Jessica, the only person who knew where I was, moved calmly around me, calling the midwife, boiling water, steady as a lighthouse, while I felt like I was breaking open. When he finally cried, when that small, furious sound filled the room, something inside me untangled. They placed him on my chest, warm, real, breathing. My son, I whispered. Daniel. For 5 days, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but quiet. He slept curled against me, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine. He didn't know about contracts or surveillance or legal threats. To him, the world was just warmth and milk in my heartbeat. And then the phone rang. Jessica answered because I was nursing Daniel. A clipped voice on the other end claimed to be from Child Protective Services. They had received reports. I was mentally unstable. I had given birth without proper medical supervision. The baby might be at risk. They needed to conduct an immediate welfare check. Jessica's eyes met mine. I knew instantly. It wasn't real. We called the actual CPS office. No report, no file, no open case. But they admitted something else. Someone has been calling repeatedly, the woman on the line said carefully, claiming to be a concerned relative. My mother. She was trying to weaponize the system. That night, Jessica noticed a car parked across the street. Engine off. Windows slightly tinted. A man inside holding what looked like a camera with a long lens. When she stepped outside, he adjusted the angle. I felt my body go cold. The police came, questioned him. He said he was a freelance photographer working on a project about suburban architecture. No arrest, no proof. But we knew. The peace I had felt holding Daniel evaporated. My milk supply dipped from stress. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me flinch. I checked the windows 3 times before lying down. On the 5th night after Daniel's birth, I sat on the edge of the bed at 3 a.m., watching him sleep. He made soft noises, his tiny chest rising and falling. I was supposed to be resting. Instead, I was calculating. How far could Claudia reach? How many investigators had she hired? How many databases could she access? Unlimited money, no moral line, and now she had escalated to child services. She wasn't just chasing me anymore. She was building a legal case. The next morning, my lawyer called. Someone has been requesting copies of your old restraining order, she said. Who? They didn't identify themselves directly, but the timing suggests your mother. She was digging for leverage, trying to paint me as unstable, trying to establish a pattern. That afternoon, I broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. I sat on the bathroom floor while Daniel slept in his bassinet and cried into a towel so he wouldn't wake up. I had fought so hard to escape. I had changed numbers, moved cities, closed accounts. And still she found me. What kind of life was this for my son? Running, hiding, checking mirrors. For the first time, doubt crept in. What if I can't outrun her? What if she always wins? I hated that thought, because it sounded like the voice she had planted in me as a child. You can't do this without me. You need me. You'll fail alone. I pressed my palms against the cold tile and forced myself to breathe. Daniel started crying. I stood up immediately. The moment I picked him up, the doubt softened. He didn't need me to be fearless. He needed me to be relentless. But relentless requires strategy. And strategy requires clarity. By the end of that week, it was obvious. Staying in the United States wasn't safe. Not when she could hire multiple firms. Not when she could manipulate agencies. Not when she had already purchased property near me once before. Jessica and I sat at the kitchen table that night, Daniel asleep between us in his carrier. We can't keep reacting, she said quietly. I nodded. She's playing long game, and she has resources. We looked at each other. You're serious about leaving the country? She asked. Yes. There was no tremor in my voice. Because the lowest point wasn't the divorce. It wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that my son's safety depended on me outthinking a woman who had spent her life controlling outcomes. I didn't feel strong. I felt tired, exhausted. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something harder. Resolve. The dark moment isn't when everything collapses. It's when you realize collapse isn't an option, because someone smaller than you is depending on you not to fall. And Daniel was 5 days old. He deserved a childhood without cameras pointed at his window. So I stood up from the lowest point of my life and made the most extreme decision I've ever made. We were leaving the country, and this time I wouldn't just run. I would disappear. The decision to leave the country wasn't impulsive. It was surgical. When you grow up under someone like Claudia, you learn one thing very well. If you panic, you lose. So I didn't panic. I planned. Daniel was 8 days old when Jessica and I began moving between short-term rentals under variations of our names. No patterns, no routines. Cash whenever possible. Minimal digital trail. My lawyer worked quietly in the background. What I didn't expect, what shifted everything, was the legal memo she sent me 3 days later. Subject line: potential criminal harassment and federal violations. I read it twice. Claudia's actions. Hiring investigators across state lines, filing false reports to government agencies, threatening to leverage recorded conversations for coercion weren't just unethical. They were illegal. Multiple counts of stalking, interstate harassment, potential wiretap violations depending on recording laws. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was looking at her behavior objectively. And objectively, it was criminal. My lawyer laid out options. File immediate criminal complaints. Seek a federal restraining order. Freeze any shell corporations linked to surveillance operations. Initiate civil damages, claims for emotional distress, and unlawful monitoring. You don't have to keep running, she said on the phone. You can fight. Fight. The word sat differently now. I wasn't an 8-year-old being told I ruined a marriage. I wasn't a college student being humiliated at dinner. I wasn't a young woman watching her boyfriend walk away under false accusations. I was a mother, and mothers fight differently. Not with noise, with endurance. I asked one question. If I file charges, can she escalate legally to try to take Daniel? She'll try, my lawyer said honestly, but documentation works both ways, and right now, the evidence is on your side. That was the turning point. For the first time, the power wasn't abstract. It was tangible. Paper trails, bank transfers, contracts, private investigator invoices, false CPS call records. Claudia believed money made her untouchable. But money also leaves fingerprints. Meanwhile, something else happened that I didn't expect. Sean emailed from an address I had forgotten to block. Short, almost desperate. She's threatening me now, he wrote. She had been calling his workplace, contacting his new girlfriend, threatening fraud charges. For a moment, old instinct flickered, the urge to protect him. Then it passed. Sean made his choices, but his email contained one detail that changed my strategy. She said she never expected you to go this far, he wrote. That line mattered. She thought I would eventually fold. Come back. Apologize. Accept support. She never believed I would cut her off permanently. She underestimated permanence. And that was her blind spot. I didn't respond to Sean. Instead, I called my lawyer again. Draft everything, I said. Everything? Every violation. Every threat. Every documented payment. I want a file thick enough to bury her. There was silence. Then, okay. For weeks we compiled. Bank statements. Surveillance contracts. Recorded threats. Witness statements from Mrs. Chen. Affidavits from Rachel. Documentation from CPS confirming fraudulent reports. The file grew heavy. So did my confidence. I stopped checking the windows obsessively. Not because she wasn't dangerous, but because I wasn't powerless anymore. One evening, sitting on the couch with Daniel asleep on my chest, Jessica looked at me carefully. You're different, she said. How? You're not scared. You're calculating. She wasn't wrong. Fear had burned itself out. What replaced it was clarity. Claudia's greatest weapon was secrecy. Exposure neutralizes secrecy. I wasn't going to scream at her. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to meet. I was going to let the legal system do what I should have done years ago. Document. Present. Proceed. The flight to Mexico had already been booked as a contingency plan, but now it was strategic, not frantic. We would relocate temporarily, not as fugitives, but as distance creators. Meanwhile, legal proceedings would begin quietly. Because there's something people like my mother never anticipate. Consequences that don't involve emotion. Only documentation. And for the first time since my father disappeared, since I was told I ruined everything simply by existing, I felt something steady in my chest. Not anger, not revenge, ownership. Of my life, of my son, of the narrative. She had spent decades telling people who I was. Now I would show them. We left quietly. Not in the middle of the night this time. Not frantic, not hunted. Strategic. Jessica and I flew to Mexico City first, then traveled south to a smaller coastal town where Americans weren't common enough to be noticeable. Daniel was 2 weeks old when he saw the ocean for the first time. He didn't know what it was, of course. He just blinked against the sunlight, tiny fists curling as warm air brushed his cheeks. But I stood there holding him, staring at the horizon, and understood something. Distance changes leverage. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., my lawyer filed. Not one complaint, multiple. Criminal harassment, interstate stalking, coercion tied to recorded threats, fraudulent reporting to child services. The paper trail was thick. Claudia had relied on shell companies to hide payments to investigators. She hadn't counted on forensic accounting tracing ownership chains. Money leaves maps. Within 3 weeks, subpoenas were issued to 2 surveillance firms. One of them cooperated immediately to protect their own licensing. They turned over contracts. Signed, dated, itemized, including detailed instructions. Monitor pregnancy status, document birth location, establish child welfare vulnerabilities. Reading those words felt like swallowing ice. She wasn't concerned. She was building a custody case before Daniel was even born. When the investigators realized federal attention was involved, they distanced themselves quickly. One firm dropped her entirely. Another quietly settled potential civil exposure. And then something unexpected happened. My grandmother called. Not crying, not panicked. Measured. She's angry, she said. About what? I asked calmly. She didn't expect you to file. Of course she didn't. She says you're destroying the family name. I almost laughed. She tried to destroy my life. Grandma was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. You didn't destroy anything, Ava. You documented it. Documentation is quiet power. Soon, extended relatives who had once messaged me about getting help stopped contacting me altogether. Why? Because when legal notices start circulating, gossip becomes risk. People who supported her publicly didn't want to be associated with potential criminal proceedings. Claudia's greatest asset had always been reputation. And reputation weakens under subpoenas. Then came the call from Sean. His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. She's furious, he said. She didn't think you had proof. I do. She says you're being vindictive. I'm being precise. There was a long silence. She's cutting ties with firms that cooperated, he added, and she's telling people you're unstable. She's been telling people that my entire life. Another silence. I'm filing my own restraining order, he said finally. She's calling my job daily. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No sympathy. Just inevitability. When you enable someone like Claudia, eventually you become disposable too. A week later, my lawyer sent a short email. Subject: Notice of Compliance. Claudia's legal team had requested private mediation. Translation: she wanted quiet resolution, not public proceedings, not discovery, not depositions under oath, because depositions are dangerous. Under oath, narratives collapse. I declined mediation. Instead, we proceeded with formal protective orders covering both me and Daniel. When the judge reviewed the evidence, surveillance contracts, false CPS attempts, coercive threats, he signed in the emergency order. My mother was legally barred from contacting me or attempting to locate Daniel. Violation would result in arrest. When I read the signed order, I felt something close to stillness. Not triumph, stillness. Because for the first time, a boundary existed that wasn't emotional. It was enforceable. Back in Chicago, Claudia's social circle began shrinking. People who once praised her devotion grew cautious. Private investigators talk, lawyers talk. Reputations shift quietly before they shatter loudly. My grandmother told me that Claudia stopped attending certain charity events. She says she needs rest, Grandma said. No, she needed distance from scrutiny. Even Sean's professional life took collateral damage. When his firm learned about the financial arrangement and legal exposure, they distanced themselves. He wasn't fired, but promotions stopped. Trust eroded. The very money he accepted had cost him credibility. Claudia believed wealth protected her, but wealth also amplifies mistakes. And she had made one critical miscalculation. She assumed I would always respond emotionally. Instead, I responded legally. From Mexico, holding my son under warm coastal light, I watched the collapse happen from a distance. No screaming, no public confrontation, no dramatic scene. Just consequences unfolding exactly as documented. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't defending. I wasn't explaining. I was silent. And silence, when chosen, is power. Daniel is 3 months old now. He smiles when I walk into the room. Not because I provide something. Not because I manage him. Not because I fund his existence. Just because I am his mother. There's something healing about being loved without evaluation. We're still in Mexico for now. Not hiding. Just living quietly while the legal dust settles. The protective orders remain active. My lawyer updates me when necessary. Claudia hasn't violated them. Yet. That tells me something important. She doesn't fear emotional confrontation. She fears consequences. For years, I thought freedom meant distance, changing numbers, moving cities, cutting contact. But distance without enforcement is just space. Boundaries without consequences are suggestions. The real shift didn't happen when I ran. It happened when I stopped negotiating. When I stopped trying to explain myself to someone committed to misunderstanding me. When I stopped hoping she would wake up one day and see me as a daughter instead of a liability. I used to believe if I found the right words, she would soften. If I succeeded enough, she would approve. If I behaved perfectly, she would stop managing me. But control isn't corrected by performance. It's corrected by removal. I don't know what Claudia tells people now. Maybe she says I'm unstable. Maybe she says I was influenced by lawyers. Maybe she says I'm dramatic. It doesn't matter. Because I'm not building my life inside her narrative anymore. I'm building it inside mine. Daniel won't grow up thinking love requires surveillance. He won't grow up believing he ruined a marriage by being born. He won't learn that affection comes with contracts attached. He will know what it feels like to be wanted without conditions. And maybe that's the only generational correction that truly matters. Sean fades further into irrelevance every week. He sends child support as ordered. He hasn't asked to see Daniel yet. I don't hate him. I see him clearly now. Weakness isn't cruelty, but it enables it. And I won't raise my son to confuse weakness with kindness. As for my mother, I don't wait for apologies. Apologies require self-awareness. And based on 32 years of history, self-awareness isn't something she invests in. What I've learned is this. The people who hurt us most often speak the language of protection. I'm worried. I'm helping. I'm doing this for your own good. Control disguised as care is still control. And love that requires obedience isn't love. It's ownership. I used to feel guilty for cutting family off. Now I understand something deeper. Family is not defined by blood. It's defined by safety. If someone makes you feel smaller every time they enter your life, they are not your foundation. They are your weight. I don't know where we'll settle permanently. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else. But wherever Daniel grows up, it will be in a home where doors don't hide contracts, where no one is reporting on his feelings, where privacy is respected. Some people might say I went too far, filed too much, left too drastically, fought too hard. But those people have never been quietly dismantled for decades by someone who called it love. I didn't destroy my family. I refused to let it destroy my son. And that difference is everything. If you're listening to this and you recognize pieces of your own story, the subtle control, the polished manipulation, the rewriting of who you are, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not difficult for wanting autonomy. You are not unstable for setting boundaries. And you are not ungrateful for choosing peace over reputation. Sometimes freedom isn't loud. Sometimes it's a signed court order, a blocked number, a quiet house, a baby sleeping without cameras outside the window. Daniel just woke up as I'm finishing this. He's stretching, blinking up at me like I'm the safest place in the world. And for the first time in my life, I believe that I am.